Hi, it's Jason from Blue Border Games, and I'm here with another video for my game Luton Legacy. But this video is going to be slightly different to some of the others I've done. It's a new series and it's what I'm calling Designer Notes. They're going to be videos that provide a bit of a background of how I've been designing the game, how I've reached this stage, thoughts for the future, and discussion on different sort of factions perhaps I'm looking at, as well as possibly a campaign system in the future. But of course, the big question is how do I get here and why? Well, I've been a gamer for probably almost 40 years. I love all sorts of games. I do a lot of card games, I play a lot of board games, lots of miniature games, of course, and Euro games. But probably the genre I love the most are skirmish miniature games. I love the fact that you'll have a smaller number of miniatures than perhaps a larger war game, and because of that then they have a greater degree of character individuality. There's often very much a narrative with the warband or the force that you're playing with. And also they're just played on, as I say, much more sort of smaller scale that's easier to get to grips with. So why do I want to design another one? Well, I've always wanted to design a skirmish game that has a very simple setup and rule set that's easy to get to grips with. Something that's speedy, as I say, to learn, but also to play, much smaller in scale. So again, it's simple and swifter to play, but something that doesn't lose the sort of strategic challenge that does come with skirmish games. I play a lot of skirmish games already. I play games like Necromunda, Mordheim, Bushido, just to name a few. And I love the depth of rules and character and lore that they provide. But again, I want to design something that's simpler, swifter, easy to set up, but still maintains that strategic challenge that you should get in a good skirmish game. So this video is going to explore and just highlight some of the key differences between Luton Legacy that I'm trying to achieve, or have hopefully already achieved, compared to some of those other skirmish games out there. So the first area is the simple setup, and lots of skirmish games are either based on a 2 by 2 foot area or a 3 foot by 3 foot area on a tabletop. It's a large area that, in my view, always results in sort of the first two turns being sort of all about manoeuvring and not a lot of action. So there's a lot of time involved with not really much happening, and that can be a bit boring. So Luton Legacy, I wanted to reduce that playing area, and the way I've done that is by setting the game based on a board system, basically tiles. So it focuses on a 12 tile, each tile being an inch by 12 tile. So it's a much smaller area, so that based on an 8-turn game, the action is going to be almost immediate. And because it's on tiles, measurements is a thing that's just based on units of tiles. So you avoid the need for measuring tapes, rulers, measuring widgets, etc. It all goes out the window. There's no need for it. It's just kept simple. You are just moving or measuring based on the tile to tile basis. On top of that then, in terms of the actual space that these 12 by 12 tiles has, you have a single deployment zone that goes right around the edge of the defined gaming area. So the outer tiles are where you and your opponent will be deploying their fighters. And there's no sort of set deployment zones in scenarios, because the way I'm designing Luton Legacy is that there are no scenarios. Each game then becomes different. So the setup rules are that you can place your fighters anywhere within that outer tile zone, but so can your opponent within a tile of an enemy fighter. So it's simple setup, but again introduces a degree of strategic challenge, because you've got to work out how your opponent is going to react to your placement and vice versa. Are you going to try and get close so you get into the action really early, or are you going to keep your distance? And depending on the faction you choose, I think that will also influence your deployment strategy. Within that outer deployment zone, then there's a 10 tile by 10 tile space, and this is going to be where most of the action of the game takes place. You can still move in and out of the outer deployment zone, but it tends to be within that 10 tile. So again, action is almost immediate. There's immediate engagement by both players in the game, rather than I said on the larger gaming spaces, perhaps one or two or even more sort of turns of maneuverability. So what happens within that 10 tiles? Well, during setup, there is a roll made for the 4 loot tokens as to where they go, and then there's also a roll made by each player to determine how much terrain is going to be involved in the game, and they themselves will be involved individually in placing that. Terrain are, again, keeping it simple, are predetermined in size. They are going to be small, medium or large, and again based on a certain number of tiles, and each player will take it in turns to place an individual piece of terrain, and they will have to sort of remember that when deployment happens after you set up terrain, you will need to be aware of, well, am I boxing myself in? Am I trying to create a bunker that actually to protect a loot token that I want, that perhaps actually my opponent's going to take over because they're going to deploy first? So again, the setup of the force, the fighters, and also the terrain is really simple, but it all introduces a very sort of strategic challenge in itself. So it has a simple setup process that I've tried to achieve, but it's also simple in terms of its scale, and I mean the size of the forces involved. Now, we're all familiar with other skirmish games that have generally between 8 and 12 fighters per team, per force, per faction, and that can mean sometimes someone takes a lot less, or they get a lot of injuries during the game, and then you have a process where one player is taking more time to move their fighters than the other, and again, it's that sort of disinvolvement of fighters that I'm trying to avoid. And the way I've done that is that in Loot and Legacy, each force will generally consist of only 3 to 5 fighters, so you know exactly what each one's doing, what they need to do throughout the game, and there's less to worry about. But that doesn't mean that you haven't got a good degree of variety to sort of decide on what type of play style you want to adopt, even within a single faction. Because each faction, you'll have 3 leaders to choose from. You can only take one, but there are 3 to choose from, and they're all generally very different within each faction. You'll also have 3 specialists to choose from, and the individual specialist type may have a limit on it. Maybe it's 2 or 3, and that will dictate how many perhaps you choose. And then the 3rd fighter type or class is going to be called troop, and they're your sort of grunts, they're your sort of bog standard trooper that you'll take. But again, there is simplicity but variety, because you will still be able to introduce variation or slight changes even on the fighters that you choose, because they will all have access to upgrades. But again, trying to introduce simplicity rather than sort of complex list building by going through loads and loads of rule books. Each fighter type has a set number of upgrades it can choose from, and it also is listed what they can take within that list. So a leader will have 3 choices, a specialist will have 2, and then a trooper will have 1. So again, I'm trying to secure simplicity, but maintaining enough variety that there's still a great sort of degree of strategic challenge within Loot and Legacy as a skirmish game. So I keep talking about simplicity and how is this going to be achieved. I'm probably asking me now. Well, it's down to the game mechanics. I mean, yes, setup is simple. You have a small scale and small number of fighters to worry about, but at the end of the day, the game mechanics need to be simple to make sure the game is achieving my goals. And we're all aware of the sort of rulebook thumbing that happens during games, and that's because until you know your force and all its various elements and the upgrades and equipment and gear, etc., until you know all that off by heart, this sort of rule thumbing or rulebook thumbing can really kill a game. So I wanted to come up with a system that just broke it down and gave you exactly what you needed before you when you were playing that game. And of course the easy way to do that is by cards. So Loot and Legacy uses 3 different types of cards. You have fighter cards, and they provide the statistics for the fighter that you've chosen, as well as its cost, any special abilities. They're all on that card. The second type of card then is upgrades, which we just discussed now. And again, the upgrades will tell you what they are, what they cost, when they can be used, and of course what their impact is. And then the third, in a similar vein, is spells for the fighters that have the spellcaster ability. And these cards will have, again, an indication of what they are, what they do, when they can be used, and also what roll is needed to be made in order to have a successful cast, basically. So cards introduce simplicity, but also ensure that you've got a much swifter game. So the other way that the game Loot and Legacy has been made simple is through something called the add system, which is attack defense dice system. Now, being of the age that I am, I remember Hero Quest, and one of the things I loved in terms of game mechanics of Hero Quest was the combat dice. So these were a dice with a series of symbols that you threw when you attacked, and when you rolled them, you knew exactly how many hits you made. Your defender knew how many shields that they needed to roll to defend against them, and if they didn't, everybody knew how many wounds had been caused. So it was very much roll the dice, you know exactly what's happening, and I wanted to recreate that sort of spirit, and it was very much influenced by that system, this add system. So I've created some custom dice that are D6, and they have 1 mighty blow symbol, they have 2 block symbols, and they have 3 hit symbols. And these are used in all all attacks, both combat and ranged, and again on a similar sort of system with regards to hits and defense or blocks. But the mighty blow is a new symbol that basically cannot be defended against. But I don't just use these dice in attacks. I've also developed the rules so that you use them for things like a command roll, which is basically an initiative roll at the beginning of each turn. I also use them for a withdrawal roll if you're trying to basically withdraw from a combat and run away or get out of the way. I also use it for the casting of spells, so the symbols I referred to on the spell card are actually the symbols on the add system on the dice, and there are other examples as well. And the reason I've done this, again, it's simplicity, because you are only using 1 set of dice rather than a d6 for this, a d8 for that, a d10 for that, and so on and so forth. It can create confusion, particularly for young or new players. Whereas if you're just using 1 set of dice in the system for all the rolls that need to be made once the game is up and running, then you are introducing simplicity. You're going to create a system that players become much more familiar with, much more quicker. And as I said, you're going to have a simple, swifter game for anyone who's playing it. Some other aspects of the game that are slightly different or familiar, I use a you go, I go system. So when one player activates a fighter and they're done, the other player gets an opportunity to activate a fighter. I find that is a much more engaging system for players. So as I mentioned earlier, if you've got someone who's got lots of fighters left and they're activating all of them, then the other player feels sort of somewhat disengaged, disinvolved, because they've got to wait a long term. So the you go, I go system is what I'm going to be using in the Loot and Legacy game. The other thing is that there is a set game length, and it's likely to be about 8 turns. It seems to be working in play testing. This is because you've got a sort of defined time limit to defeat your opponent or secure more victory points, and it builds tension rather than being an open-ended thing. So it will have a set turns, and then the last point is, as I said, the victory point, but it's a dynamic victory point system. So you will get victory points for attacking and killing, the different fighter types, but you will also get victory points for securing a loot token, so basically landing on it and picking it up. But if that fighter then dies, you will lose the victory points. So the victory points means that it can go up and down. So by the time you get to the end of the game, it can move quite considerably throughout those 8 turns. So I hope that little video has given you an idea of how Loot and Legacy is different to some of the other skirmish games. As I said, it's not a criticism of existing systems, it's just a sort of insight into why and how I've developed this game to be what it is so far. As I say, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please check out all the other videos on my channel. Please also check out the Blue Border Games Facebook page for more updates and insights onto the game's sort of progression and development. And I hope to see you soon. Thank you.